I would have made this video like 2 months ago, but I forgot. So, here we are, folks. I think that when approaching a game from a critical point of view, it's important to consider if that game is a part of a series or not, and more specifically, if it's a sequel. There's an expectation for sequels to sort of push the envelope and expand upon what the original did in some way, and while this isn't absolutely required 100% of the time, the sequel should at least have enough uniqueness or some kind of a story to tell that justifies its own existence. Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity is an odd case because it's a very informal sequel to Hyrule Warriors, and it's a more formal prequel to The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. So that gives me two major lenses to view it through. And while I think it does more than enough to justify its own existence, I also think that looking at it as a sequel or a prequel that expands upon the original games leaves a little to be desired. And let me get this out of the way, I really like Age of Calamity. I think it's a very good game. I just also think that there are some issues with the game's structure. And yes, I know that the first wave of DLC just came out a couple weeks ago and there's more coming down the line, but the issues that I have with this game run too deep to be simply fixed by some new playable characters. On a conceptual level, this game is absolutely genius. I remember when I woke up to this game's announcement and went, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. A prequel to the events of Breath of the Wild explained through a Warriors-style game because it's telling the story of a war. This kind of game is perfect for telling that kind of story and of the massive battles that come with it, and I was super excited to see more of the champions interacting with each other. Not only that, but the implications of this game were pretty dark. This is a game where you go in knowing that terrible things are going to happen to your protagonists, and that knowledge made opening up the game for the first time, at least for me, all the more exciting. That is until I got to the very first cutscene. Let me break it down for you. This isn't even a spoiler, folks, because again, this is the first thing you see when you start the game. Zelda is protecting Link because he's about to get folded, and then you think this is gonna be like a moment where it's like, freeze frame. You're probably wondering how I got in this scenario. But then they shift focus, and as it turns out, a little baby egg guardian sees them in trouble, so he figures, I'm gonna go save the day. So he goes back in time to right before the calamity happens in hopes of changing things. How do I put this as nicely as possible? I know. I hate him. How's that? I mean, okay, I don't hate him. I like his design, I think he's cute, and I don't hate his personality. I mean, how could I? He goes back in time just to save his friends. No, what I hate is everything he represents. This little egg guardian represents Nintendo's inability to make a Zelda game with a tragic ending nowadays. They're too afraid of having all of the protagonists die at the end, even though it's what is expected. So they introduced time travel. Yeah, that's how badly they want them to stay alive. I know time travel isn't a new concept for Zelda or anything, but in this case, in this game in particular, it's especially egregious, the fact that they resorted to time travel just so that they could avoid having the characters killed off in the end. It also means that this game isn't a prequel at all. It's more of a spin-off detailing what could have happened in an alternate timeline, and it becomes clear at a certain pivotal point in the game, when the game completely goes off the rails, that they weren't concerned with making a Breath of the Wild prequel as much as they were concerned with making Breath of the Wild Warriors. A Warriors game with as many Breath of the Wild characters and references as they could manage. Which is, in and of itself, totally fine, but it's not what they marketed the game as. So, you may be asking, then, what is Age of Calamity really? Well, it's Breath of the Wild Warriors, like I said. I thought I made that clear already. Yeah, it's Breath of the Wild Warriors. It retains the same basic elements of any hack-and-slash Warriors-style game, but from the beginning it's clear that they're trying to introduce as many Breath of the Wild mechanics as possible. For instance, you can use runes, and you can flurry rush, and Link has all his weapon types from Breath of the Wild, so on and so forth. The runes are a combat mechanic, and each character has a unique way of using each rune. For example, when Link uses the bomb rune, he throws like 1,000,000 bombs at whatever target you actively aim at. When Zelda uses the bomb rune, she creates a giant automated bomb robot that shoots out regular-sized bombs. Yeah, it's over the top, but it wouldn't be a Warriors game if it wasn't, and I think it's better for it. This is just one of many ways this game carries the legacy of Hyrule Warriors successfully, a game where every single character was incredibly unique, and it felt like that game had 1,000,000 characters too. Characters in this game feel just as unique. In fact, you could argue they cranked it up to 11. The movesets on characters like Impa are extremely... well, I said characters like Impa, but I realized that there are no other characters like Impa, and that's kinda my point. We're talking about a character who has a mechanic based around charging up so you can shadow clone yourself as much as possible and then deal a ton of damage before the clones disappear. That's so inspired, so unique, and most importantly, so fun. This game, these characters, the mechanics, they're all so fun to mess around and play with. And this is a subjective thing because I've heard differing accounts, but I think that there's slightly more thinking required to play this game than the original Hyrule Warriors. Like any Warriors game, there are keeps that you have to defend and capture, so your slaughter isn't entirely aimless for the 50, 40 or so hours that this game will take you. I feel like this game gives you more variety and specific tasks you have to do, going mission to mission. This one is an escort mission. This one you have to get this thing to open another thing. You can't cross this thing in this mission, so you have to go around the other way. It's not a hard game by any means, but it actively tries to put you in unique situations that make you think a little. The only downside to that is that it makes replaying certain missions a bit of a hassle, but luckily there are lots of side missions that have this level of uniqueness and creativity as far as their tasks go, which means that there's plenty of different missions that you can play. You can get by just fine by mashing the 2 attack buttons, but the game will actively alert you when an enemy is weak to a certain type of rune, and it's little bits of depth like that that keeps the game engaging. As much as I like Hyrule Warriors combat, that game can get repetitive at times. Ask Gerard. This one can too, but they took measures to minimize that feeling, and as you unlock new characters and new weapons for old characters, the combat really starts to open up, and it's actually not easy to play each character at their most optimal. Not that hitting the ceiling in this game is important at all, I'm just throwing it out there. But shifting gears a little, what about the characters outside of gameplay? How are they portrayed in the game's story? Well, I've hinted at how I don't really like this game's story, and I'm not going to elaborate on that. The character interactions are pretty good, actually. One major gripe I had about Breath of the Wild was that the most interesting characters in the game were all dead. So, if you wanted more of the champions like me, I don't think this game is going to disappoint you on that front. We get to see them interacting with each other more, as well as Link, Zelda, and Impa, and while I think none of them really deviate from what their archetypes would lead you to expect, they don't need to. They're just a fun bunch of characters to watch. Urbosa is still very much the mom of the group, Daruk is still the funny uncle, Revali is still an asshole, and Mipha is still Mipha. More importantly though, I have to touch on everybody's favorite princess, Zelda. Because I made a video about how Breath of the Wild Zelda is one of the weaker iterations of the character, and it's done decently well for me. So do I think that this game rectifies those issues I had with the character? Yes and no. To boil an 8 or so minute video down to one point, my main issue at the end of the day was just that the development from point A, the bratty, moody version of Zelda, to point B, the responsible, assuring Zelda, wasn't shown enough. It felt to me like her character arc was unfinished, and I feel like in Age of Calamity, someone at Nintendo was just like, "Hey, they don't like the bratty Zelda? Just retcon it. Just get rid of it. Out of here." At no point in Age of Calamity is Zelda rude towards Link or anyone else. It's weird. Instead of showing her growth, they opted to just cut that part of her out of the equation. That being said, I do like this version of Zelda. She cares for others and really wants to help the kingdom by pushing boundaries. She envies Link because of his courage, which could be the reason why she's rude to him in Breath of the Wild, but that isn't shown or stated in this game, so I just have to assume that it isn't a part of this version of Zelda. Something to remember is that because of the stupid Egg Guardian, this is an alternate timeline. I unfortunately can't assume that any of the seeds planted in this game carry over to what is shown in Breath of the Wild, which is part of the reason why this game fails as a prequel, but I'm sure you already understand that. Age of Calamity is a super fun game, but it's not the game it was marketed as. It builds upon the combat mechanics of Hyrule Warriors, but it doesn't actually tell us the story, or at least the true story of the Calamity. And that being said, if you don't care about the story and just wanted to see more of the champions, it's gonna be a fun time, because again, it's a good game. I could have gone deeper with this video, but I figured there wasn't really a point. At this point, if you were gonna buy Age of Calamity, you already have. As of now, it's the highest selling Warriors game Koei Tecmo has ever made, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. So, guys, thank you for watching this far, and join me next week when I talk about the struggle it is to make a video about anything that isn't Zelda adjacent. Thanks. Bye.